RGV sector, our agents, our chief are only left with 31 drones to intercept this. Now, this type of unbalance is unacceptable in the RGV that continues to have high illegal immigration and high illegal drugs crossing our border. That being said, there's other high persistence surveillance, which includes aerostats. There were 7 aerostats here in the RGV sector, and due to lack of funding, 3 have been decommissioned, and the remaining 4 are going to be defunded by the end of this year. With that being said, Chief Ortiz, what is the department currently doing to assist with countering the cartel technology? And again, 35,000 that we detected in the last year.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Good to see you. I will tell you that technology is probably a priority, or no, definitely is a priority for myself and my leadership. Whether it's South Texas or whether it's Arizona, the SUAS issue, as you know, cartels have deep pockets. They don't have to worry about policy. I have to worry about policy. We have 201 small UAS systems deployed throughout the country, and I intend to continue to expand that at great levels over the next 24 months. We have a counter UAS program, as you might be familiar with, and we continue to expand that because we recognize that the cartels have become awfully sophisticated, and a smuggler no longer has to leave the Mexican side to smuggle a group of migrants or narcotics across the border. He can do it virtually via a phone app and a SUAS. And so we need to continue to expand that footprint, but our policies also have to match that. We have to be able to mitigate those 35,000 drone incursions that you just described. We are on the process, or in a process of mitigating a lot of those criminal organizations and being able to exploit where they're coming from, how they're doing it, and we're going to continue to expand that as much as we can. And then with respect to the aerostats, I'm a big fan of aerostats. When I was in Afghanistan, and I think some of the committee members will recall that aerostats kept us safe. And when I came down here in 2013, I was the architect of the aerostat program here in South Texas. And when I went up to headquarters, I expanded it across multiple locations across the southwest border. But it is an expensive piece of technology, and I have to find an alternative for that.
Now, Chief Ortiz, can you tell the committee and the members here that are in the audience, can you tell us how deep into American soil have these cartel drones actually come in?
So it will vary. Some of the drone technology that the cartels are using are very sophisticated, and we've seen incursions miles away from the immediate border area. For us, we are doing, I think, a tremendous job of identifying where these criminal organizations are operating out of, but we need to expand that.
So in my debriefings with Border Patrol, I have heard that these drones from the cartels have come up to 8 miles into American land. Would you say that is an accurate statement?
No, ma'am.
How far do you believe that they come into American soil?
I think it depends on terrain. A lot of areas along the southwest border are very mountainous when you think about what we have in Arizona and El Paso. But then when you think about what we're dealing with here in South Texas and in some areas in West Texas, pretty flat country. So cartels can operate via line of sight. And once again, it really depends on their ability to leverage existing systems, whether it's cell phones and whatnot.
We just recently lost some of those aerostat balloons in this past January. So what is the measure that the department is using to fill the gap until we get to the next step?
We currently have a team deployed and looking at some alternatives to a similar type of platform, but that's less expensive. What we've seen in the past with aerostats is in these areas, high winds.
Chief Ortiz, I'm sorry, I'm out of time. I'm just going to ask you, how fast can we deploy some of this technology?
we're hoping to deploy it in the next 6 months, ma'am.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I want to thank our panel of witnesses for their incredibly valuable testimony today. And Mr. Kagan, I want to especially thank you. You were a Democrat-invited witness, and you showed up. So thank you for that. The folks who invited you bailed on you, but thank you both for your service to our country and for being here today. And the members of the committee, they may have some additional questions for you. They'll submit them in writing, and it would be great if you could get that back in writing. The witnesses are dismissed, and our committee stands in recess for 15 minutes.
Well done. Well done.
Great.
Testing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes if the members could make their way to the dais.
Got such a good chairman.
And we're waiting on Sheriff Coe and a few other members. Are we got all the members okay? Can you guys find our other witness for us? Thanks, Ryan. While we're off the record here, and I want to thank the media for being here. All of you that are back there with your cameras. I know sometimes people criticize the media, but I just want to thank you for being here today. The story of what occurred in our first round of testimony needs to be told, and I deeply appreciate your presence here. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead.
while we're waiting, I would offer to write their headline for them. U.S. Border Patrol admits that we do not have operational control of the southern border, that it is not secure, and that Biden administration policy is the cause. That's what he said. The candor was astonishing.
It was.
Wouldn't it be nice if we could get that from other administration officials and get it on a regular basis? I'll yield back to me.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. The committee will come to order, and I'm pleased to welcome our second panel of witnesses. I ask that the witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. I would now like to formally introduce our second panel of witnesses. Stephen McGraw has served as the Director and Colonel of the Texas Department of Public Safety since 2009. He's served in both Texas and federal law enforcement since 1977 in various capacities across our entire country. As frontline leader for a state that is among the most affected by the crisis at our southern border, Mr. McGraw's insights and expertise are invaluable. Brad Coe is Sheriff of Kinney County, Texas, a border county that has faced the very real effects of this crisis. Sheriff Coe has firsthand experience in encountering illegal aliens and protecting his community. We thank the sheriff for making the drive over and look forward to hearing what he has to say today. And Chris Cabrera is the Vice President of the National Border Patrol Council, a labor union representing the Border Patrol agents and support personnel. Mr. Cabrera is an Army veteran, so that makes us brothers, and a current CBP agent, so he has firsthand knowledge of the scope of the threat before us here, as well as understanding of what our brave border personnel have to endure every day. I thank the witnesses for being here, and the witnesses' full statements will appear in the record. I now recognize Mr. McGraw to kick us off for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement. You're recognized. Could you turn, it'll turn green.
Yes, sir. I was trying to delay the time clock. I'll do anything to get a little more time, but Chairman, this is the 11th time as the Director of the Department of Public Safety I've testified before congressional hearings. And I know this is a very important issue, has been, continues to be, and I can tell you the most significant public safety, homeland security threat to the state and the nation, for that matter, is an unsecured international border with Mexico. It's been that way for some time. And as the border states, everybody's a border state. Alabama, everyone in here is a part of a border state. New York, you're a border state in that regard. Simply because we've failed to secure the international border with Mexico. What's happened over the years is we've allowed the Mexican cartels to metastasize to something much larger than they've ever been. The most powerful, ruthless, depraved, and violent criminal organizations in the world, and they're on our doorstep. They've got command and control elements. 6 of those cartels operate throughout Texas. They've dominated the lucrative drug and human smuggling market. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine. Whoever thought methamphetamine 10 years ago, you wouldn't imagine it, but they own it right now. The same thing with fentanyl. They've taken that over as well. I know you've talked a little bit about that already in terms of the threat as it stands. So there's no question about it. It's the unsecured border is a problem. It's not just a federal problem, it becomes a local problem with the sheriff next to me. I do have to put this in. I got to commend certainly Chief Raul Ortiz, I've worked with for over a decade, outstanding professional, and he oversees a highly professional elite organization of men and women that serve on the front line of our homeland security and national security defense, the U.S. Border Patrol. We're very proud to work with them. Texas is a very pro-law enforcement state, pro-military state, pro-law and order state, and supports their Border Patrol to the point where 2 years ago when the governor and I visited, he was upset that all of a sudden we've seen what we saw in 2014. 2014, we had 300,000. You heard Chief Ortiz talk about 300,000 unaccompanied children and family units. It swarmed and swamped and overwhelmed the U.S. Border Patrol. And since then, the governor's had us preparing for a mass migration event if it happens again, because what happens, it takes Border Patrol off the line. So what do we have in 2021? And we were planning for a failed state scenario, a catastrophic event scenario, but instead what we got is a federal policy disaster, okay, that incentivized illegal migration instead of criminalized illegal migration. So it's not a matter of just in terms of consequences, it's you're actually rewarding people, and this is the greatest country in the world. And if you're going to reward them and tell them, you come here, and we're going to give you a notice to disappear, that's what they're going to do. They're going to continue to come in droves. And the cartels have exploited it. They use social media, okay? They use information warfare. They use all the military applications in terms of whether it's logistics, but command and control, information, operations, intelligence, and certainly the demonstration or use of or application of lethal force. And we talk about it's semantics in terms of terrorism. The governor designated the cartels as terrorist organizations because, in effect, that's what they are. I mean, how many Americans have they killed versus Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Sunni extremist groups? And they do it daily. And the most recent threat that is really disturbing from Texas, because cartels have always been making money. Now they get to reap billions of dollars of money just from the human trafficking side. They extort on both sides of the border, and not to mention, okay, the Mexican cartels are collaborating with our gangs, these regional gangs, these state-based gangs, these transnational gangs, to support the criminal activities on both sides of the border. So it only makes it worse, okay? And not just a border issue, it becomes a statewide issue. It affects every community in the state. As it relates to fentanyl, is that it's not enough to make money from a polydrug cocktail, which they were doing. Now, because it's much more profitable, how about selling to our kids, our youth, and anybody, lookalikes of oxycodone, Oxycontin, Adderall, okay, Percocet, and almost identical. You can't tell the difference. Our scientists can't tell the difference. And when your own DEA administrator says that 6 out of 10 of those pills have a lethal dose of fentanyl of 2 milligrams, that's a concern. And yes, we have seen deaths, and they don't really care. Yeah, you'd think that they would, but they can expand profits just in terms by increasing addiction in that regard. So now they've not just in terms of the overdose death, it's poisonings because it's a substitute. So, what's a state to do? And under Governor Greg Abbott, he launched Operation Lone Star over 2 years ago and deployed thousands of National Guard troopers, special agents that work for DPS, and certainly our Texas Rangers, our tactical teams, aircraft, tactical Marine unit. And the impact is always, felt first and foremost at the local level with the sheriff and our local police departments in that regard, and found resources and worked with the legislature to get billions of dollars of Texas taxpayer dollars have been invested in doing everything we can to help Border Patrol perform their vitally important mission, and to detect, interdict transnational criminal activity between the ports of entry. I think that's my time, so I'll be quiet now, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. I should have asked this at the beginning. Do you prefer to be called director or colonel? But thank you for your...
Those are 2 nice terms. I've been called much worse.
Well, thanks for your opening statement. I'd now like to recognize Sheriff Coe for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you all for being here today. Like I said, my name is Brad Coe. I'm the Sheriff of Kinney County, Texas. I'm currently in my 2nd term. Prior to this, I spent 30 years with U.S. Border Patrol, all of which I spent my time in Kinney County. Kinney County has 16 miles of riverfront property with Mexico, and we are the 27th largest county in the state, but population-wise, we only have 3,200 people. I have 6 full-time deputies and 8 part-time deputies to cover the 1,300 square miles, which most of our time is spent close to town, leaving very little coverage for the rest of the county. Currently, we're under siege by illegal aliens and smugglers coming through the county, trying to get to destinations within the United States. With the current open-door policy, Kinney County has seen a dramatic increase in illegal alien activity. The number of migrants seen on game cameras that I currently have deployed throughout the state, thanks to DPS, we're averaging between 160 and 180 people per night that are going through the county unchallenged. That comes out to roughly 60,000 people entered through my county this year. These are also considered godwise by Kinney County because we don't have the resources to go out and track and try to apprehend these people walking through the county. The damage to fences, water lines, and structures has ranchers spending more than they can afford to keep their properties up and running. The loss of the ability to grow crops is also a huge issue. Large groups of people walking through the property, creating trails, kills the grass that the livestock, the sheep, the goats, and the cattle depend on for survival. Our game ranches, we have exotic game ranches where you can hunt animals year-round. And some of these hunts will cost you anywhere between $40,000 on the high end, to $80,000 per animal. With the number of illegal aliens walking through the county, it's making it more and more difficult for the hunters to be successful, paying these large fees to get the animal of their choice. If we lose them, I lose the county. On the smuggling aspect, we have 6 roads that lead directly away from the border, and 2 others that circumvent the Border Patrol checkpoint in Uvalde County just east of us. These highways have seen an unprecedented increase in human smuggling activity. For calendar year 2022, which was last year, Kinney County deputies apprehended 741 human smugglers. And we filed over 3,000 felony cases against these smugglers. It's a huge increase from calendar year 2021 when we apprehended 169 human smugglers. We are currently on track right now to exceed 900 smugglers for the year. In February alone, the shortest month of the year, we did 95 smugglers. With the increase in human smuggling, increased the chances of vehicle pursuits and bailouts. The number of pursuits increased with the human smuggling apprehensions. These increases risk the risk of traffic accidents, death, and damages to property. With the increase in pursuits that result in traffic accidents puts a huge strain on our community resources. Kinney County only has one EMS crew on duty at any given time. Our first responders for the fire department are all volunteer. We had an accident earlier in the year. Well, actually, it was in December. It was a pursuit. The vehicle tried to avoid this being spiked, lost control of the vehicle, killed 3, including the driver, plus 3 others critically injured. We had to borrow resources from another county to handle that situation. Our EMS crews were completely tied up, which took them away from their regular duties of servicing the county. Like I said, our volunteers for the fire department, they were all on scene. They had to leave their jobs to come help with that accident. Because it was a rollover, because people were ejected and killed, we had to call in air support. We had to call in Air Life from San Antonio and San Angelo in the event they were going to be needed, which brings up the question, who's paying for this? My county doesn't have the resources to pay for Air Life. As soon as the Air Life helicopter hits the ground, it's roughly $45,000. We don't have that kind of money. The people that they're transporting to from the hospitals don't have that kind of money. They don't have the insurance. We had an incident last year. We had a rollover. EMS shows up. Our only crew shows up. They're about 20 miles south of town. One of our locals in town suffers a heart attack. He didn't make it. Would he have made it had EMS been able to get to him in time? That's one of the questions we will never know. And that is all I have. Well, one other thing. I have to fight tooth and toenail to get what I have to protect my ranchers. That's all we have. We had a movie industry, Lonesome Dove, the Alamo, on and on. About 150 movies were made in Kinney County during the lifespan of Alamo Village. That has gone away. The sheep and goat industry, we reigned supreme in the world with our sheep and goat industry. That has gone away. All we have now is our hunters. That's all we have to protect the county, to support the county. We have one grocery store, one gas station, and 3,200 people. If I lose any of that, I lose the whole county. And I will go to my grave fighting for this to keep my county as safe as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Really appreciate your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Cabrera for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Green. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to testify on behalf of the National Border Patrol Council. The NBPC represents 16,000 frontline agents of the Border Patrol. My name is Chris Cabrera. I joined the Border Patrol in 2001 after serving 4 years in the U.S. Army as a paratrooper. I spent my entire Border Patrol career here in the Rio Grande Valley sector of Texas. In fiscal year 2022, the Border Patrol made an unprecedented 2.2 million apprehensions. This figure is approximately 5 times the number of apprehensions made in the last year of the Trump administration. It's a clear sign of how the border policies of this administration are failing. Approximately half of the individuals we arrested last year were expelled under Title 42. As you know, this authority will cease after May of this year. And what happened to the other million that were not expelled? The vast majority were released into this country under either a notice to appear or paroled. In addition to apprehensions we made, there were well over 1.2 million confirmed illegal immigrants that evaded capture in the last 2 years. They got away simply because we didn't have enough manpower to apprehend them. To put this in perspective, the Rio Grande Valley is approximately 1.3 million people in the population. We had almost the entire population of this region escape, just walk right into this country last year. If this isn't the definition of a problem, I don't know what is. If we are going to address this chaos in the border, we need 2 things. First and foremost, we must end catch and release. Winston Churchill once famously said that Americans always do the right thing, only after they have tried everything else. When it comes to catch and release, I believe that Winston Churchill was right. First time I testified before Congress was before the Senate Homeland Security in 2015. I told the Senate then, and I will tell you today, as long as we continue to release illegal immigrants into this country, they will continue to come. It's that simple. Ending catch and release not only makes common sense, it's the law. Section 235B of the Immigration and Nationality Act requires Homeland Security to detain all migrants apprehended entering illegally. Homeland Security may, and I emphasize may, parole individuals on a case-by-case basis for humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. That's not what the Biden administration has been doing this past 2 years. A federal judge just vacated the administration's parole policy, which is a catch and release by a different name. The second issue is Congress's responsibility. And you need to resource the Border Patrol to accomplish our mission of securing this border. Border Patrol staffing hovers around 19,300 agents. The Tucson sector chief just recently testified before a House Oversight Committee that the Border Patrol needs 22,000 agents to deal with this current crisis. Increasing our net manpower by 2,700 agents is going to take tremendous effort that will require us to do two things simultaneously. First, we need to keep the agencies we already have, and we need to recruit more agents. It sounds like a simple problem. Our Border Patrol attrition rate is 6.9%, which is 72% higher than the Office of Field Operations. The bad news is that our attrition rate is expected to climb over 9% by 2028. The primary reason we cannot retain and recruit agents is the lack of pay parity with other federal law enforcement agencies. I have spent most of my life protecting this country, whether it be for the Army or the 21 years I've spent in the Border Patrol. I've told my wife that you don't join the service to get rich. However, if I were to leave for another agency, I'd probably make about $15,000 more. For many agents with young families that come from different parts of the country, it's a no-brainer for them. So they leave as soon as they get here. It's simple for them. If we continue to hemorrhage personnel, there's no way we're going to secure this border. We spent billions on aircraft, on technology, on fencing, and that's great. We appreciate all of that stuff that you guys have given us. However, we have not sufficiently invested in our agents, which is the most important element in border security. Last Congress, Senators Portman, Sinema, and Lankford introduced S 4775, which has a provision, Section 4, to address our recruitment and retention issues. I know the committee is working on comprehensive legislation to address this crisis, and I appreciate your effort and the fact that you came all the way down here to have this hearing that we need. Now that you know what we need, I respectfully ask that you take action, and that action must include addressing our retention and recruitment issues. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I will gladly answer any questions you may have.
The gentleman, I want to thank all three of you for being here. I really appreciate it. I want to ask the members that they'll be recognized, or tell the members they'll be recognized in order of seniority, as typical for our committee for questioning. If there is time for an additional round, we may allow that to happen. And again, we'll be recognized in order of seniority. I now recognize myself for my 5 minutes questioning. Mr. Cabrera, and is that Cabrera, or how, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Cabrera is fine.
Cabrera, okay. Could you briefly talk about how the Border Patrol agents have been affected by the border crisis physically and mentally?
You know, physically, it's been a rough patch for us these last few years. We lost many agents to COVID. We lost quite a few to COVID. We've had a couple officer-involved deaths with, just recently in December, we lost an agent to a vehicle accident. On top of that, suicides. Border Patrol, I think, lost 17 people in the last year. Put that in perspective, the NYPD has 35,000 officers, I believe, more or less, and they lost 4. So it is a big issue. We see a lot of stuff out there that the average person doesn't see. I think that what hits folks hardest is what happens with the children we see. We see a lot of young kids coming across, 3, 4, 5 years old, 7 years old, that are unaccompanied. Their parents are already here in the United States, and they send them by themselves. And who knows about the hundreds, if not thousands more that never make it through. So that I think is more on the mental aspect of it, as well as some of the physical. It's a difficult job. It's increasingly getting harder by the fact that we're not put in a position to do the job that we were trained to do. I mean, I think the Border Patrol is the only union you're ever going to see in the history of unions that is actually asking for more work. We're just let us work, let us do our job. We don't care where you put the coffee pot. We don't care about lumbar supports for our chairs. We just want to go to work. And we're just asking that you let us work.
Well, I really appreciate that. Let me ask this question of you as well, sir. What do your agents share with you? What are their thoughts about the policy changes that occurred, in 21?
The morale is down. The morale is down significantly. If you look at our numbers now versus our numbers 2 years ago, you'll see that the numbers are lopsided. Most of our agents are frustrated with the job. They're frustrated with the fact that we're babysitters. Maybe 30 to 40% of our agents actually get out to the field on any given day, and then a lot of times they get called back in to process or transport somebody. So the real bad guys, the smugglers, the ones that are harming people, the people that are bringing in drugs into this country or trafficking in humans or kids, they're getting away, and that affects the agents in their desire to do their job. And let's face it, if you have a young kid, say, that comes from Charlotte, North Carolina, and he joins the Border Patrol, and his wife comes down, say they go to Big Bend, and it's 2.5 hours to get to a Walmart, much less a hospital. The wife can't find a job because she can't speak Spanish. And then ICE comes around and says, hey, we'll give you more pay Monday through Friday, weekends and holidays off, and we'll get you back home. Of course they're going to jump ship. So we're not only losing seasoned agents, we're losing brand new agents. So there's no way we're going to catch up with that.
Let me ask Director McGraw a quick question. How much is DPS spending per month for border security, and how much was DPS spending before January 21?
Well, the state legislature and the government have invested a lot of money over the years, and certainly $800 million in the Department of Public Safety alone. But when we saw the record numbers, and I say record numbers, 1.3 million apprehensions in Texas in 2021, and again 1.4 million in 2023. The governor and legislature has dedicated billions of dollars now. So when we do these intensified operations and we continue to send troops down and conduct these around-the-clock operations, they're threefold of what they were before. Importantly, now we have the National Guard, and the state's paying for that National Guard. And it's a very important part of it because as Border Patrol and probably Chief Ortiz already talked about, personnel, you got to have technology, you got to have infrastructure, and you also need doctrine, right? The correct doctrine and policies in place to be able to secure the border. And one last thing, I'd like to at least put a pitch in for Border Patrol. The federal government's always undervalued the patrol function. They always have, and don't recognize the post 9/11 environment, that patrol function, how important it is in terms of prevention. And certainly they do need to be on par with their other federal counterparts. We need more boots on the border, less wingtips, and you get right down to it. And that's really what Border Patrol brings us. So.
I got your reference. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just to summarize that, it was your budget has had to go up 3 times, if I understood you correctly, not counting the National Guard's additional cost at the border.
At least threefold, exactly. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right, thank you. My time is up. I now recognize Chairman Higgins.
Colonel McCraw,
Sir.
what's the relationship like between DPS and DHS right now? How has it been impacted by the policies of the new administration?
And we don't let the policies of an administration impact our relationships with our partners, bottom line. It's too many law enforcement officers in Texas, 70,000, local and state. And so we work well with our federal partners. We integrate operations. It's Texas. We get along with each other. We like each other. We respond, and we got each other's back. So it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed.
That's the kind of answer I would expect from a law enforcement professional, because you're referring to your relationships with the men and women you work with on a regular basis to perform your mission to the best of your ability. The current administration, as every executive administration in the United States, has a constitutional responsibility to secure the international borders, to help our sovereign states maintain operational control with the Mexican border is absolutely a constitutional requirement. Do you feel that this administration, compared to the last administration, is fulfilling that obligation?
Well, absolutely not. Obviously, what I testified or in my written statement is that we've incentivized, a global mass migration event, and that deliberately impacts on Border Patrol and law enforcement in our communities across the border. So clearly, it's had a negative impact, and there's consequences. There's an unsecured international border.
I agree, Colonel. Would you concur that ultimately the responsibility for that failed policy is upon the shoulders of Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden?
I'd say that certainly the administration, exactly who, it doesn't really matter. It's a failed policy, and it's a federal responsibility to do it, and it's not being done, period.
Well, I would say that it falls upon the shoulders of Secretary Mayorkas as the executive that allegedly has the background and the knowledge to perform according to the instructions of the President of the United States. He also has a responsibility to advise the President if the President's policies are failing in the mission and actually bringing injury upon the nation. So I would say the failure of our policies as we see them at our southern border falls squarely upon the shoulders of Secretary Mayorkas. Sheriff Coe, my 1911 brother, thank you for being here.
No, thank you.
Let's talk about what happens to these illegals when they get into the country and into your county. You come across these guys, you have to take them into custody in some way. What happens after you have concluded your law enforcement interaction with them? What's the responsiveness of ICE under this administration versus the last?
Well, if my deputies come across them, say, on somebody's property, we file charges on them for criminal trespass. DPS and the governor was very gracious, giving us a $2.5 million grant to assist with the prosecution and hire people so that we can get this done. Same thing if we catch a human smuggler. We file charges on them on everything that we can stack on them, and it's been very successful. One of the issues we do have working with ICE and some Border Patrol is Border Patrol will catch them, and the landowner is present when they're caught, and the landowner will say, I want these turned over to the county, to the sheriff's office, so I can file criminal charges against them. Border Patrol refuses. If we catch an illegal alien and for whatever reason we cannot prosecute them because we don't have bed space for a female or they're underage, whatever the case may be, we have problems having ICE to come pick them up. They say, no, it doesn't meet our status, so we need to kick them down the road.
So, Sheriff, the state charges, if you're able to prosecute under state charges for, say, criminal trespass, you conclude that adjudication at some point. They're still illegal within the country. Has the federal government put you in a position to illegally release aliens within the country?
Several times I've tried. I'll give you an example. We had an accident. There were 3 that had very minor injuries. They refused to go to the hospital. EMS cleared them. I called Border Patrol to come pick them up. They said no, because they've been in an accident. We will not take them. ICE refused to take them. They wanted me to kick them down the road. Took it upon myself. We took them back to the international border. We took them to the port of entry and sent them home.
That's what a good sheriff would do. Thank you for your testimony, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Vice Chair Guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel McCraw, first of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank Governor Abbott, the men and women under your control for the billions of dollars that the state of Texas has invested in fighting this crisis. And I see that that investment has been successful in some aspects. In your written testimony, I see that during the 2-year activity of Operation Lone Star, you report that there's been more than 350 million dosage units of fentanyl that have been seized, 19 tons of methamphetamine, and that you and the men and women of the Texas National Guard, the game wardens, the DPS officials, have helped apprehend and turn over to Border Patrol over 350,000 illegal immigrants. In your statement, there are some very compelling parts. In the second paragraph, particularly, where you say that the Texas Department of Public Safety, that is your assessment, that the most significant public safety and homeland security threat to Texas and the nation is our unsecured international border with Texas. You go on to say the federal government has failed to do its constitutional duty and secure the border, that this failure comes at the detriment of our citizens and the benefit of the Mexican drug cartels. Colonel, would you agree with the statement that border security is national security?
Absolutely.
You go on to describe our Mexican border as porous. And then finally, at the end of page 1 of your written statement, you say that there's compelling evidence that the federal government has incentivized rather than criminalized illegal immigration. And then you set forth specific figures as number of immigrants who have been apprehended just within the state of Texas, not within the border as a whole. 2021, you talk about 1.3 million immigrants being apprehended just within the state of Texas. 2022, we see that number grew to 1.4 million. And your testimony goes on to make sure that we know that that does not include the number of gotaways, which would significantly inflate those figures. We know that in May of this year, the administration has indicated that they will end Title 42, which this administration has said in December that we could see across the southern border a number up to 14,000 immigrants a day coming across the southern border. My question to you, Colonel, is, in your opinion, based on the information that you have, once Title 42 expires, what impact will that have on the number of immigrants that you're seeing coming into the state of Texas on a daily basis?
It'll certainly increase. How much, it's difficult to project. But there's no doubt that anything that incentivizes or encourages or something that the cartels can exploit from an information standpoint, they're going to encourage more to come. And the more that comes and the less Border Patrol is able to do their job and the more difficult it is for the state to be able to step in and help them do their job.
And what information have you received from DHS as to their plan of action as to how they plan to address this coming surge of immigrants when Title 42 expires?
Well, we work with our local Border Patrol sectors, so there's a state plan. Whether there's a federal plan or not, we can't tell you, but we certainly have a state plan that then brings together all law enforcement in Texas and the National Guard in an integrated way in terms of response as it continues to get worse. But right now, it's never been worse at 1.4 million. This is an historic high. You got to go back to 1986 to see these types of numbers in Texas, and we track it by calendar year.
Well, and I know just looking back December alone, again, across the entire southern border, over 250,000 immigrants seized in a single month. If Title 42 goes away, if the predictions that this administration has in place, those numbers will far exceed the worst month in the history of immigration. And so I guess my question is there currently a plan in place that you're aware of by DHS as to how they intend to handle the surge? Have they briefed your agency? Because clearly you're providing support capacity to our frontline CBP officers. And so here we are roughly 2 months away, 60 days away from Title 42 going away. Is there a plan in place? Have they briefed you and your department on what you can do to prepare for the coming surge? And I'll yield back after the answer to that question.
Yeah, there is a plan in place because the state of Texas doesn't need the federal government's permission to protect it. The Governor has made it clear that we're going to have a plan in place. We have a plan in place. It's integrated across all 3 levels of government, and it's multi-jurisdictional, multidisciplinary, I can tell you that.
Thank you, sir. The gentleman yields, and I now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, this hearing has already been extraordinarily significant because the U.S. Border Patrol chief testified to Congress that the administration's policy of releasing illegals in the United States as opposed to detaining them and removing them is the cause and the driver of the crisis at the border, which he characterized as being out of control and not subject to operational control of the United States government. So that's a big deal. And now I'm curious, in this stage, Colonel McCraw, you said something that sort of got me back on something that sort of is something I've focused on a lot or thought about a lot. And I don't know what your answers are going to be. They may be adverse to me politically, but that'd be fine. Because I think about, we all focus on the circumstances as they are, and they're very bad, and all the bad effects that we're seeing in terms of members of the Border Patrol, Mr. Cabrera and their families, and Sheriff, what you're seeing in chases in your community, Colonel, what you're trying to do in terms of the investment your state has to make to get this under control. But here's what I wonder about is where could we go? If this continues as it is for another 2 years, we're only halfway into this through this administration. They're devoted to this policy that's so destructive. So where could we end up later on? And my mind always goes back. The phrase that you used, Colonel, you were talking about the cartels, the transnational criminal organizations, and you mentioned command and control. I heard earlier that 35,000 flights that Congresswoman De La Cruz pointed out of drone flights. They're coming across. I've made some people sort of smile, not unknowingly, when I asked them hearing a year or so ago, why we don't shoot them down? And they also like, you can't do that. So we're having, they're bringing drugs and people over with the use of far better equipment than Border Patrol has available. I always get the name of the town wrong. I think it's Culiacan. In January, had not the first, but the latest war between the Mexican military and the Sinaloa cartel over the arrest of Ovidio Guzman, son of El Chapo. And I would love to show you these pictures. I don't have them, but the Los Angeles Times has some great pictures that show flaming tractor trailers and smashed cars and one or two of the narco tanks with these improvised rigs on them that cartel fighters taking on the Army, firing 50 caliber weapons at aircraft in the air. And I understand it's a whole different deal in the United States, but if you have, I'm told, Mr. Cabrera, that Border Patrol always tells me that nothing comes across the border unless the cartel permits it. And I understand, is that basically true, sir?
Yes, sir, that's true.
And I hear that $15 billion of income comes to the cartel just from the fees for people to come across. And a lot of them owe those fees. We're hearing about those stories. And I heard HSI, or I forget what it is, which agency, but is seeing a surge in violence relating to collecting those fees. So you have hundreds of thousands or millions of people coming in. Obviously, most of them perfectly fine people, and they want to abide by the law, but they're all under the thumb of a cartel that's growing across the border. And you talked about the command and control, the capabilities they have, Colonel. What's to prevent them from developing in the United States the circumstance that you saw in Culiacan, where they could go to war against American law enforcement and military forces?
Well, first of all, the Mexican cartels are already inside the United States. They have command and control elements in here involved to support their operations, drug and human trafficking. They work with the gangs that we talked about before. Where you see most of the violence, manifest itself as relates to the cartels is with gangs and through gangs. If you talk to local law enforcement, anybody will tell you, even in the fentanyl market, it doesn't matter what market it is, it's the gangs and their collaboration with each other and with the cartels are the biggest problem right now. The Mexican cartels own Mexico. It's the bottom line, through intimidation, hyper-violence, coercion, and frankly, corruption.
If our policy continues to profit them and build the people they can abuse and manipulate for their own purposes, couldn't they strengthen in the United States to the point that they're that kind of a hazard?
Well, a seemingly compassionate policy of allowing everybody in the world to come to the United States is anything but. Because you turn them over, as you noted, to the Mexican cartels. And there's too many rapes, there's too many violent crimes that are committed upon those women and children that are moved into this country. And the extortion continues, not just in terms of when they get to the river, they got the money, they'll continue it on in stash houses. In some cases, Chinese in particular, we've come across in terms of where they're indentured servitude. They don't have $50,000, $70,000 to pay to get here. They owe a criminal organization that money, to be able to work off their debt. And whether it's the sex trafficking industry, we've seen when young girls and women have been attracted and recruited from Central America and in Central Mexico on the promise of a domestic servant. I mean, these are brutal, depraved, cowardly criminals that can care less. And certainly they impact. In our profession, it's the absence of crime and disorder that defines success. And right now, there's anything but the absence of crime and disorders relates to the border, and it impacts every community in the nation.
At risk, the chairman will gavel me down. I'd like Mr. Cabrera to answer that question too. Do you see any risk of the kind of specter that I described in the United States?
As far as that happening, I mean, we have had issues here in the Rio Grande Valley. I know that there's cartel members living among us in our area, not just in our area, and probably everyone's area that are just flying under the radar. There's always a possibility, whether it's on a small scale. I can't see the larger scale taking off just for the fact that our law enforcement is not corrupt like it is on the Mexican side. But there will be violence on it, yeah.
Thank God for y'all. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Thank you.
The gentleman is humored and now yields. The next, I'd like to recognize our next member from Florida, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I heard a story Monday when I was in Miami about an individual that tried to cross and was captured by the cartel, and thinking that everybody in Miami has money, they called his cousin and FaceTime. The cousin didn't have the money, and they basically murdered his cousin on FaceTime because he couldn't give up the $10,000. That's the kind of people that we're dealing with, having absolutely no value for human life. It's all about profit. Mr. McCraw, have you told has the Biden administration gotten the word of what it is they need to do in order to fix the problem at the border?
They have a lot of smart people back there. It'd be impossible not to know what's the right thing to do. This is not rocket science.
I agree. And so, do you think the President of the United States is dumb?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Do you think
because I don't even see it.
Do you think that the Secretary of Homeland Security is dumb?
Certainly he's not.
Okay.
There's no question.
So the only thing you can come up with is this is done on purpose.
I can't see it otherwise. It's done on purpose. I don't know that it's meant to be malevolent and to rot the problems it has, but it certainly has.
Well, you'd have to be pretty dumb not to see that what you're doing is malevolent, and it actually has real dire consequences in the United States. So it's actually done on purpose.
Yeah.
I've come to that conclusion a long time ago.
Yeah.
They're actually doing this on purpose.
Yeah,
all right?
Whatever the reasons,
why, I don't know.
Yeah, whatever the reasons, because this is not a political issue, it's a public safety issue, and it hurts.
I got it. So now, okay, now that we know that it's on purpose, okay, now let's move on to something else, okay? All right. How many different cartels are there on the southern border?
Well, in Texas, which we focus on, there's 6 Mexican cartels that operate.
Do you have any intelligence on how many members of the cartels have on the border, on the Mexican side?
No.
You don't?
No. We've got some estimations in terms of working with DEA along those lines, but exact numbers.
No, not exact. What's your estimation?
I wouldn't even want to, because the extensions of the cartels, I wouldn't want even to project in terms of how many members, but clearly there's as many members of the cartel than there are in gangs in Texas, and we've identified over 100,000 gang members. So it's
at least 100,000. You think at least 100,000 of them?
There's going to be, because at some point, and whether they're directly or indirectly cartel members, there's no question they've got an army of people down there. In fact, I mean, we know from past experience, the whole Zetas part were former Mexican military that went over to be the enforcement arm of the cartel. The Gulf Cartel moved over, created its own cartel. So you have this continuing, rebranding and splitting of cartels, and they continue to, as we've talked about before, metastasized.
Does the Mexican military have the capacity to deal with these cartels?
They haven't demonstrated the capacity to deal with the cartels.
But do you think they have the capacity?
I don't know.
Okay.
Because the capacity includes will.
Well, that's my next question. You beat me to the punch, because then do you think they have the will?
Well, I know the government of Mexico does not have the will.
Thank you. I do too. I think the government of Mexico does not have the will. They may have the will if the drugs that are poisoning us were actually poisoning the Mexican people. So I really have starting to have some doubts about where this government of Mexico lies. And is there a deal, a secret alliance, something that says, hey, keep the drugs out of Mexico, okay, and I'll leave you alone. You can go ahead and poison the Americans all you want.
There's no news to the fact that Mexico has had issues with corruption as it relates to the Mexican cartels.
And yet the policies of the Biden administration actually helps the cartels because they're making huge profits off of immigration, right? So these policies actually are helping the cartels grow in power and their ability to kill Americans, and yet the Biden administration knows they're wrong and continues to do it.
Yeah, well, clearly there was at the end of the day, the impact on the cartels is they're richer and more powerful than they were before this mass migration began.
All right, and that is all due to the failed policies of the Biden administration, which we have to assume they know are wrong.
I'm not going to say what they assume. I just know that it's not rocket science to figure this out.
Yeah, or brain surgery, actually. I mean, we have a physician.
I think brain surgery is a little complicated, but yes,
okay.
Yes, sir.
I got it. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I yield back.
Thank you. And I recognize our next witness, or our next questioner, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank all of you for being here, for your service to protect this country and keep it safe. We have had what I would characterize as a groundbreaking testimony today by Chief Ortiz, Chief of the Border Patrol, and he said that he does not believe we have operational control over the southern border. Number two, he does not believe that in at least 5 of the 9 sectors along the southwest border that it is secure, and that we have a policy crisis. And Mr. Cabrera, you know, I'd like you to speak on behalf. How many people do you represent in the National Border Patrol Council?
16,500.
Please speak on behalf of 16,500. Do they believe that we have operational control of our southern border, that it is secure?
Absolutely not.
You know, we've heard a lot today. I appreciate your testimony about the morale. Do you feel, again, speaking on behalf of those 16,500, do they feel supported by the Commander-in-Chief, by Secretary Mayorkas? Do they feel like they have the resources they need to do their job?
Absolutely not.
How sad is that, that you have testified that we have not sufficiently invested in our agents? We hear you. We support you. How sad is it? Do you want a bipartisan solution or just one party supporting you?
No, we need a bipartisan solution. This immigration, especially what happens to these women and children along this border, has nothing to do with politics. I mean, if we lined all these kids up in the room, I'm sure you guys would come up with a solution in a matter of hours.
And how sad is it that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not here in McAllen today in the Rio Grande Valley to see those unaccompanied minors, to hear the stories, to talk to you, and to hear you saying that you have a recruiting and a retainment problem, that we had 17 plus suicides last year. It's very sad. Colonel McCraw, thank you for your service. You know, just about an hour ago, I talked to a family member, the daughter of one of the 3 women who is missing in Mexico, from Bonitas, right here in the Rio Grande Valley. Very sad situation. And with that event, with the recent murders of Americans in Mexico, do you see the cartels acting more brazenly? And in fact, let's go a step further. Do you see them employing terroristic tactics?
They've been employing terrorist tactics for years. This is nothing new. Kidnappings of Americans is nothing new. Kidnappings, extortions, torture, these things go back decades to the Mexican cartels. So I don't mean to be gratuitous, it's just not covered in Mexico. And the reason it's not, I mean, being a journalist is not a good position to be in Mexico, writing about cartel violence, plain and simple. They'll target them. I don't care if it's a blogger or a professional journalist or a judge or a police officer. No one's exempt from the cartels and their level of brutality.
All 3 of you are law enforcement professionals, military experience. If you see an enemy use a tactic, technique, or procedure that threatens the lives of those that you're in command of or civilian populations, do you disseminate that information?
Certainly.
So if it's been alleged that there was an IED that was used by the cartels across the border, would that be something that our Border Patrol agents would want to know?
Absolutely. I mean, I know as a Border Patrol agent, I'd like to know something like that was happening, regardless of where it is on the border. I mean, I think it needs to go out to across all agents, all stations, that be on the lookout for something like this, because it could mean your life.
Absolutely. I assume the same for the Sheriff's Department and for DPS throughout the state of Texas?
Certainly.
Yeah. Colonel, can you talk to the expense that the state of Texas has had to endure because of the abdication of responsibility of the federal government? I'm talking all the expense, from the hospitals to the jails, the Operation Lone Star and Stone Garden.
Just in the last couple of years, it's billions of dollars, but there's even more cost because every time we get a surge like this, and where we take troopers, we take special agents, Texas Rangers, and we take resources from other parts of the state, as sheriffs know, from those locations, and we send them down to the borders to be able to do intensified operations. And that takes away a public safety value in those areas. So it becomes more safe here, supporting our Border Patrol partners, less safe there. So there's an impact in terms of statewide, and we recognize that. And certainly the governor recognizing that, and the state legislature has recognized that. But the governor's made it very clear to me is that at the end of the day, is that a secured international border with Mexico is an absolute imperative. And without that, we don't have public safety or homeland security in Texas.
I thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your testimony and your service. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Mrs. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today and engaging in this important discussion with us. It's a necessary discussion, and again, we are outraged and angered that our Democrat colleagues didn't see the importance of our national security and our border security, even to be important enough for them to get on an airplane and come down here and be here for this hearing. Shame on them. Shame on them for not coming and listening to you and engaging in this important discussion about how to protect our country and protect our border. During Trump's administration, the entire administration, there were approximately 2,437,856 alien encounters in that 4 years. During the Biden administration, to date, which is just over 2 years, there have been 4.7 million alien encounters just in his time as president. That is double. It has doubled in just that short amount of time. Now, under the Trump administration, there were 581,257 gotaways during 4 years. During the Biden administration, to date, it is 1.3 million gotaways. This is an incredible increase, and it is not by mistake or accident. In your opinion, each of you, what are the policy changes that have happened to contribute to this invasion of our country? Mr. Cabrera.
I think first you have the parole. We're paroling people into the United States instead of mandatory detention, mandatory removal. The talk of ending remain in Mexico and then putting it right back on a couple days later, that had some issues. Before we could send everybody back, and after Biden restarted it, we could only send certain folks back. I think those are the two biggest ones. If we continue to let people come in, they're going to continue to come in. It's just like with a kid. If you let them do certain things and you tell them no, but there's no consequence to it, they're going to continue to test those limits, and that's what we're seeing. We can tell them all day long that if you come, we'll send you back. But once we release them into the country, they call home, they put it on Facebook or Instagram or whatever they use, and more people come because regardless of what I say or the commissioner or whoever, their brother, their sister, their cousin told them how to do and how to do it and how it's done, and so they do it.
Open door policies. Sheriff Coe.
Well, I agree 100%. Because of the lack of consequences, they just continue on. That's why we started prosecuting for criminal trespass, and we've seen it effective because we're pushing the foot traffic into another county. We're still catching them, but not as many, but we're pushing them to another county. I hate to do that, but that's the only way I can protect my county. So there has to be consequences.
That's right. Colonel McCraw.
Agreed with Agent Cabrera.
Thank you. It is my opinion, and I have co-sponsored legislation to impeach Secretary Mayorkas for his failure as Secretary of Homeland Security to do his job to protect our country. and in not doing his job to enforce policies or bring policies under the Biden administration that allow our good men and women of the Border Patrol and ICE to do their jobs. And I think that's something that should be done, definitely. But I'd like to talk to you for a second, Mr. Cabrera, because you said something that struck me, and I want to acknowledge this. You stated in your opening testimony that you told your wife that you didn't take this job for the money, because your job, you don't get paid a lot of money. Border Patrol agents don't get paid a lot of money. As a matter of fact, men and women in all law enforcement don't get paid a lot of money, but you do such an important job, and I thank you for that, and you're the right man for the job. So I just wanted to say that to you. But also, I looked it up while the discussion was going on. Secretary Mayorkas makes $200,000 a year in his job while he's failing to do his job. And I'm a business owner, and that's what I did all my life before I became a member of Congress. And I believe in accountability as well, and that's what you gentlemen just spoke of, is accountability. And I believe in accountability to people that are getting paid to do a job. And Secretary Mayorkas certainly should not get paid the big salary that he gets to put men and women in the Border Patrol, their lives in danger like they are every single day. In the hearing before this one, or actually this morning, it was revealed to us that an explosive device was found by Border Patrol on January 17th. But it didn't seem to be reported to very high levels. And I was just wondering, had you heard about an explosive device being found in January?
Absolutely not. Actually, the first I learned of it was this morning, watching the live stream in the room down the hall.
Right, and so that, to me, that's the cartels taking it to a whole different level that puts our Border Patrol men and women in extreme danger. And you mentioned, how many suicides did you say there were among Border Patrol agents?
17.
Out of 18,000?
16,000.
Okay.
Well, 19,000, 19,500, including
19
supervisors and management.
Out of 19,500, there were 17 suicides. And you said there were how many suicide under New York?
30 out of 35,000 officers, 4.
4. That shows the tremendous difference in stress and emotional toll on Border Patrol agents with a much higher suicide rate, and that again is devastating. Is there, what do you see could be done for Border Patrol agents to make their jobs easier, less frustrating, and for them to be able to accomplish what they need to do on a daily basis?
So if you could answer as quickly as possible, I appreciate that.
We just need to get out there, let us do our jobs the way we were trained to do it, enforce the laws as they were written, and let the law supersede the policy as opposed to the policy superseding the law.
Thank you.
Well said by a paratrooper. All right. The gentlelady yields, and I recognize Mr. LaLota from New York.
Thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for being here, for what you're doing for our great country. I represent a suburban district in New York. I'm about an hour or two east of Manhattan. I'm the Yankee in the crowd and appreciate your hospitality. I think I've traveled the furthest of any member of the committee here. This issue is important to my constituents. It's important to me because New York is indeed a border state. We are a border state because of the sanctuary city policies that come from my state. We are a border state because of President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas' failed leadership, and we are a border state because of the lack of infrastructure, technology, and personnel at the border. And my first line of questioning is going to go to the folks from the state and local, the director and the sheriff. You folks are stepping up and are leading where the federal government is not. This should be a federal issue. The federal government has a responsibility to secure our border. And in absence of that, I commend you and I thank you on behalf of my constituents for stepping up. We've had tons of fentanyl deaths in our county, about 400 recently. We have crime, we have overcrowding in our schools, we have legitimate people looking to go through the immigration process, and folks have cut that line, but your leadership, gentlemen, has helped thwart some of that. So my question is, as a follow-on to Mr. Pfluger's question, what is the cost of you stepping up in the federal government's absence in terms of dollars? What have you had to spend, first you, Director, and then Sheriff afterwards, what have you had to spend to fill those leadership shoes?
Well, just in the last 2 years, the state's spent over $4 billion. And they're looking at spending another $4 billion in the next biennium, and they're having to find revenue to be able to do that. So they're not planning on it being the problem immediately going away and dissipating. And frankly, if we would love to see, and by the way, 23,000, and we're talking about Border Patrol agents, you're down to 19,000. And then you talk about New York City, one police department's got more officers than the entire U.S. Border Patrol. And they've got two board. I mean, it's pitiful in terms of the underinvestment the federal government's made in Border Patrol over the years in border defenses. That's my one comment. I'll keep my other comments to myself.
And many of my constituents don't know this. My understanding is of Texas' 200 and something counties. Many of the counties deploy their officers, their deputies to the border to help secure the border, sir?
254, and they certainly would, but they're usually back at home trying to take care of the gaps that we leave when we left, when we send troopers down south. But there's not a one that doesn't have to deal with border-related problems in their jurisdiction already.
Thank you. Sheriff, on the cost in terms of dollars to your agency, sir?
On my cost, my current budget's just a little over $1 million. That's to cover everything. We're 6 months into it, and I've already expended all my fuel money. So we've got to borrow from somebody else or take it from another department because of issues like that. The cost of EMS having to transport people to and from a local hospital, which we don't have. We got to go 40 miles to go to a hospital. About 20% of what we're transporting to hospitals is the result of illegal immigration. Aliens that have succumbed to the heat or have some type of broken leg, broken arm, been snake bit out in the brush, we have to transport them. We don't get reimbursed. So our EMS crew and my office are going to be in the red again this year because of this.
Safe to say, Sheriff and Director, you would agree that the federal government should reimburse you for those costs?
They should have been reimbursing us a long time ago because the federal government won't pay for our transport to and from.
I'm not sure that Stafford Act covers policy disasters, but clearly it is a disaster and certainly a crisis.
I agree with that. Moving on to opportunity cost, you're diverting resources, personnel, equipment, and otherwise to cover the federal government's back where the federal government has failed. How would you address where you're having to miss the ball back at home in terms of crimes against people, crimes against property? What are you missing because you have to divert your resources to a federal government problem?
Well, on the county level, part of my job is, yes, to help get cats out of the trees, hang out with the kids at school, teach the kids to respect law enforcement, be an example. But because of this illegal immigration, my resources are going elsewhere. Yes, we still handle some of the domestic stuff, the big stuff, but being in the public eye, like we're supposed to be, we're out doing Border Patrol's job. No offense to Border Patrol, because they're being tied up doing other things. My crew I've got 6 full-time deputies, and we spend the majority of our day processing smugglers and illegal immigrants because the Border Patrol can't. So we're missing out on a lot when things we should be doing that we can't.
We have to conduct surge operations, sustain deployments around the state from resources elsewhere in the state, and continue to move wave after wave after wave to be able to keep intensified patrol operations, on the river, certainly in the air and on the ground and the brush streams.
Let me close by once again saying thank you. It's a sacrifice that you and your officers and deputies are making personally, financially, and us New Yorkers, we do appreciate it. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Luttrell from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see everybody again, Colonel and Sheriff Coe. It's been a while. It's good to lay eyes on you again. Yesterday, we had the opportunity with DPS to travel around on the river, and we saw where the cartels. And on the other side, it was beautiful, beautiful homes, just extravagant. But the cartel have come in and taken all that over and run away all the industry and businesses and families that were there. So now it's nothing like it used to be. My question is, Sheriff, with the push across the border into your county and surrounding counties, how many people are leaving? Because you said industry, the sheep and the goat industry depleted. It's gone.
Yes, sir.
Are you seeing that surge more and more? And is it lateral across the borders?
Well,
on our side?
If we go by the last census, the current census shows we have a population of 3,100 people, almost 3,200. The census before, we had 3,900 people. So by that, we've lost 700 people in the past 10 years. But what we're starting to see because of this is, yes, people are leaving, but they're selling their properties. We've got one really nice piece of property that I'd like to have, but he's tired of fixing his fences. He offers hunts to wounded warriors, and he's constantly in the public eye in our county anyway, helping with the 4-H, FFA, Little League, et cetera, et cetera. He's getting ready to pull out, and we won't see him again. So we will lose that part of the industry, that tax base, plus his goodwill towards our county keeping us afloat. And the only people that are buying big tracts of land right now are the people that are subdividing it. They start subdividing it, they want to divide it. He's got 3,500 acres. Somebody wants to come in and buy that and subdivide it into 10,000 or 10-acre plots, which will completely destroy my county because people are tired. They're getting ready to leave.
Just to clarify something that you and I spoke about, if a rancher's fence is torn down and their livestock exit the ranch and get on the freeway, the highway systems, and a vehicle strikes that animal, it's the rancher's responsibility to pay, correct?
Correct. The rancher is responsible for that animal getting on the highway.
And that happens quite often.
It has happened quite often.
Okay. Mr. Cabrera, and this is the hard one. This is the nut we can't seem to crack. And when it comes to morale and health, I mean, in Big Bend, 2.5 hours to the Walmart, that's not going to change.
Yeah.
That's just not. Yeah. We have to figure out another way. How can we help enhance the want and desire to become an agent, but serve in these challenging areas?
You know, I think a big part of it is going to be pay parity. You know, if somebody can leave to a different organization and get closer to home, I mean, it's just common sense that, you know, they're going to go home, and what the old saying is, happy wife, happy life. You know, and some guys will take the commute. Some guys drive 2 hours from El Paso, but it starts to become a drain on them little by little. So I know the patrol has done some things as far as making it a hardship station where you could stay for X amount of years, and then you could transfer to a station of your choice. So stuff like that helps out.
This may be a little technical, but with just the advancements of technology in the areas that we are short on officers, would it make more sense if we surge technology into places that maybe necessarily people don't want to operate and have that assist a smaller number in order to enhance numbers somewhere else?
Most definitely. I mean, you look at the aerostats, those big blimps you see. I mean, those things are wonderful. They work wonders for us out here, and I know most of the patrol has lost access to those. We still have them in the McAllen areas, and once we lose them, and we will, it's gonna be a big blow to our agents because they're very useful. They can operate around the clock. They're not worried about fuel like the helicopters. If you could get those in other places, that would greatly help.
I think we might work on that. I yield back, sir.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Strong from Alabama.
Thank you. Sheriff Coe, you mentioned that the population of Kinney, Texas is declining. I already got that question answered. What is the capacity of your jail in Kinney?
Right now, my jail is closed down because it's old and it doesn't meet jail standards.
Okay. How many schools do you have in Kinney, Texas?
One.
You have one school. Do you have illegal aliens being taught in your school?
At this time, no.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you for going the extra mile, and rather than just kick the can down the road, taking those illegals back to the border and send them back where they came from. That right there is very commendable. Colonel McGraw, do you believe it's time that the U.S. military stops this invasion of the southern border?
Yeah, I certainly believe it's time for the federal government to do its sovereign responsibility and whatever resources it needs to do it.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Burkeen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff, you had mentioned something. This would not be something that's part of the record of this hearing, but I had a chance to introduce myself to you. I liked your 5-inch brim and your good leather work on your belt.
Thank you, sir.
We had a conversation before this hearing started where you had mentioned to me in 2005, circa, that there was a policy that you paid attention to, detention, consequences. I'd like for you to elaborate on what you shared with me in private to this committee.
Okay. Back in 2005, I was with U.S. Border Patrol. We started a program that was called Operation Streamline. We started in one little part of Del Rio sector and expanded it as it went on. every illegal alien caught, everybody, male or female, was prosecuted for 8 U.S.C. 1325, which is illegal entry into the United States. It worked. We had areas in Eagle Pass, Texas, that were seeing groups, on apprehension on a daily basis, anywhere between 50 and 150. Once we started that prosecution, they went someplace else. Once they moved, we moved with them. And after about a year and a half, our apprehensions went through the floor. Where we were apprehending 150, 200 a day in Brackettville, it went down to 10 or 12 a day. And those were usually, they were being transported in smuggling cases, but they too were prosecuted for illegal entry. And then we expanded that into expedited removal. In other words, right there on the spot, we did the paperwork, they were removed back to Mexico, and it was considered a deportation. So if they ever entered again, they were facing felony charges. That program worked.
And can you elaborate on, there was jail time involved in this, correct?
Yes.
As a deterrent?
Up to 180 days in jail for the illegal entry, which is a misdemeanor. And if they were caught again for reentry after deport, I believe it's 2 years or 5 years? 5 years. They faced up to 5 years for reentry after deport.
That's great. What do you experience now? Can you elaborate on if you show up on the scene and your county is not the first to apprehend them? If the Border Patrol is there, what happens in terms of your ability to start trespass proceedings against this person?
If we show up on scene and the landowner wants the ones that are caught on his property processed and prosecuted for criminal trespass, but Border Patrol got their hands on them first, they will not give them back to us. It's not because the agents in the field don't want to. It's not because the patrol agent charged doesn't want to. It's coming from Washington.
And there's so many years of experience here in front of us at this table of dealing with this. President Biden has made the comment, not one more foot in regards to building a fence or a wall. Director, what can you tell me? We saw, I think it was either under DPS or National Guard in the El Paso sector, rent a fence that the Texas Department, was actually where the federal government had stopped the construction. I took a picture with it. It says rent a fence.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to me about Texas's position on physical barriers?
They're an absolute necessity. And as Congressman Luttrell indicated, sometimes you don't need it. Big Bend's a pretty good infrastructure itself if you've got technology employed, but clearly El Paso, when you have Venezuelans swelling along the Del Norte Bridge in trying to push in, if you don't have the infrastructure, and certainly on some of the areas where Texas Military Department has put concertina wire and other infrastructure, then you're going to get people able to move in such quantities that you can't stop it. So infrastructure plays a key role, and I think that whether it's permanent infrastructure or even temporary infrastructure where we had to use simply because we don't have time to build the type of fence that needs to be there, it's important.
And Mr. Carrera, you represent 16,000 Border Patrol agents out of almost 20,000. And what is the guys and gals that you work with, what's their position on physical barriers? We have people across the nation post-86 amnesty who would talk about that there's no value in physical barriers. What are the people that you work with and your years of experience, what does it tell you on the value of physical barriers to solve this problem?
They work. I mean, it works 100%. You may come over that wall. If you climb over that wall, the chances are that our agents are going to be there to meet you on the other side. In Hidalgo, if there was no wall there, from the time you left the river to the time you disappear into the community is less than 30 seconds. But with that wall up, that gives us a good 3, 4, 5 minutes for you to get over and get down, and our agents are there. So without that wall, it doesn't stop everything, but it gives us enough time to get in position. And I mean, there's one around the White House. There's a reason that it's there, because it works.
So in terms of allocation of resources, you believe that one agent has the ability with the fence, a fencing structure, has the ability then to be able to cover much more ground, whether they're horseback, ATV, that gives that agent greater distance and more efficiency in their day-to-day work activities?
It is a force multiplier. It does slow them down so that our agents can get there and get the job done. So it's not the only tool in the toolbox, but it is a very necessary tool.
Thank you. I yield.
The gentleman yields. It would appear that I skipped one of our members. My apologies. My deepest apologies to the gentlelady from Florida. You are now recognized, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's testimony makes clear that Mexican drug cartels are trafficking narcotics, weapons, and children across our southern border, and that border security is collapsing under the failed policies of the Biden administration. We must recognize that the Biden administration's reckless failure to secure our border is allowing criminals to enter our country and undermining the rule of law. Between October 2022 and January 2023, Customs and Border Patrol officials arrested 9,445 individuals with criminal convictions, 209 members of known criminal organizations, and 53 people whose names appear on the FBI's terror watch list. What's even more concerning are the estimated gotaways who we cannot track. One argument that has been made by the administration in support of their failed policies is that our approach at the southern border should be humanitarian focused. So I would like to return to a subject of some prior statements, Colonel McCraw, that you made, and discuss the humanitarian effects on people that are coming across this border, those who are exploited, injured, or even killed. And I would like for you to share with us, if you would, your impression of whether these policies of the administration are in fact having a humanitarian effect.
Well, it may seem compassionate, but anytime you attract millions of people from around the world to essentially turn themselves over to the Mexican cartels, and we've described in detail in terms of how violent and ruthless they are, you're basically setting them up to be victims of crime. And it happens again and again and again. And not just when they get, before the river, but on the river, but in the other side of the river. And the Sheriff Code talked about in terms of abandonments. And you'll see even kids, because kids are great. You can bring with them, the younger the better. So bring a kid in your family unit if you're captured in that regard. But at the same point, they abandon those kids. And I don't know how many lives we've lost. I don't know Kinney County, but certainly Brooks County, right by the Falfurrias checkpoint. All of these things are playing out. Investigations that we conduct. Investigations are very important when we target the cartels. Very important to do. But sex trafficking investigations. We've talked about these major cases. What these cartels and these organizations do is to people is undescribable. You don't hear about it. It's not reported much, but it's happening, and you see it in our investigations, and you see it in patrol operations.
Tell us, if you would, what are the primary types of those investigations that you see, the common things that are happening, criminal conduct that's occurring, that's victimizing these individuals who are attempting to cross the southern border illegally?
Well, first and foremost, it's very difficult to tell the difference between smuggling and trafficking anymore with the cartels. So first and foremost, the money on the front side, you can argue, well, that's just the smuggling fee. But when they get across, they're maintained and housed in inside stash houses, and they insist upon calling relatives to get more money. So it's kidnapping, in effect. Then you get them when they finally go to their final destination. They know where they're at. They know how to get in contact with them in that regard. And now it's extortion. They continue to pay money back to the cartels that they owe because they couldn't afford to pay all of it. And, going back to the policy side of it is that people, will give up, and they've demonstrated again, they will sell everything they have to be able to try to come to the United States because it's that important. If they believe they have an opportunity, they won't if they believe that there are consequences.
Agent Cabrera, I'd like to ask a similar question of you. One thing that you mentioned earlier was your belief that if the children who you had seen victimized as part of this flood of individuals illegally across our southern border were here, that we would reach a policy solution. Tell me, if you would, what it is you have observed with women and children and how they are being treated coming across our southern border.
Just the other day, probably about a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks, it was about 35 degrees, 40 degrees, somewhere in there. And we had a little boy that was brought up by another group that found him crying on the river. He was 4 years old. He had one shoe on. He was soaking wet. And his parents were already here in the United States. We see that all the time. We see little girls, 5, 6, 7 years old, that their parents are already here, and they sent them in care of a smuggler. And the parents are in Houston or in Detroit or wherever. A while back, I had a 13-year-old girl that came up to us, turned herself in at the wall in a group of about 70. We asked for her documentation, and she handed us her birth certificate. She didn't say a word. All she did was cry for the hour and a half it took for the buses to get out there to come pick her up. We couldn't console her. And, I mean, God only knows what happened to that young lady. I saw a lady, I think in her late 50s, and she was just pummeled to a bloody pulp. This was about a year ago. And the reason she was pummeled is these river guides tried to get to her 12-year-old granddaughter. And luckily she fought them off, but she paid the price for it. But we see that time and time and time again. And if you did mandatory detention, mandatory removal, we wouldn't see this because we wouldn't be incentivizing people coming over and let's do everything we can. Let's risk our lives. Let's risk our young children. Let's put our young girls on birth control at the age of 12 or give them Plan B because we know that's part of the journey. If we disincentivize this journey, people would stop taking that journey.
Thank you, Agent Cabrera. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields, and I now recognize from her own district the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Dela Cruz.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. When I spoke last session, I talked about the importance of technology and specifically drones, and where we had over 35,000 detections and 10,000 incursions. Well, drones can't work themselves, right? We need the manpower, the agents to be able to work them. So retention and recruitment is an important part of securing the future of our nation. So this question actually goes to Mr. Cabrera. Mr. Cabrera, over the last year, due to the failed Biden policy and the stress that it has put on our Border Patrol agents, have you seen an increase in agent retirement?
Yeah, most definitely. And, you know, like we said before, technology is great. We can have all the technology in the world, but if we don't have the agents, bless you, we don't have all the agents on the ground to stop it, we're not going to be able to do anything. It used to be when I first came in, and even up until about 5 years ago, when you hit that retirement age, you had maybe a 7 to 10 year gap where you could go, but most guys didn't go. They stayed till mandatory. Now when guys hit that retirement age, they jump as soon as they can, and that's a shame because we're losing very senior, seasoned agents that we're just letting them go.
Do you see that trend continuing?
I see that trend continuing, and I foresee it getting worse.
Share with the committee here about recruitment, and recruitment being a key part of being able to make sure that whoever's retiring, that not only do we still fill those spots, but even increase our agents at the border. So share with the committee about polygraphs and how polygraphs have affected recruitment.
You know, I think polygraphs have their place. I think the Border Patrol polygraph, I think it's a flawed system. I know we've had guys that come out of the military with security clearance, top secret, and they fail the Border Patrol polygraph, and so they get sent on down the road. I have tons of stories, whether it's people I know or people that I'm related to that can't pass the Border Patrol polygraph, but they pass the one for customs, or they go into DPS, or they fail it the first time and pass it the second time. It's just astonishing that nobody can pass this polygraph, and I mean, they ask some just ridiculous questions. They even go to, sometimes I've even heard of them going to people's sexual orientation on these polygraphs. What that has to do with anything is insane. But, you know, if there is a place for it, they need to revamp that system and make it so that we're not losing good candidates to DPS, which we are. And, you know, it's good for them, it's bad for us.
So is this something, the polygraph test and how it's being utilized with the Border Patrol recruitment, something you would like this committee to take a look at?
Most definitely. I mean, like we said before, we're losing tons of great agents for just silly technology.
Tell us about overtime caps and how that affects maximizing the boots on the ground.
We have overtime caps. I don't know the exact numbers on it, but we do have a cap on overtime. So if we work it early on in the year, which like this time of the year, everybody starts taking their overtime, and then towards September, October, November, there's no overtime left, because even if it's available, the agents can't go over that cap to work it because they've made too much already.
So let me make an example for my colleagues here that I think is very important. So people are maximizing their overtime right now. So let's just say November, if we had a migrant flow of 10,000 Haitians come over like they did in the past years, people would be maxed out on their overtime and could not go out and assist. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields, and I just want to add that in the border bill that we have put together, the polygraph issue is addressed. So hopefully the administration will sign that bill and the Senate will pass it. But for prior law enforcement and military, et cetera, those with the security clearance, the polygraph will be waived. A couple of admin notes. First, for the committee members, we have some food for you in the round table room, and we will do the press conference in about 20 to 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask you, I know that every member was notified about...
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I know that every member was notified about this committee hearing. Could you tell me what date we were notified so that we could make our schedules available for this most important hearing in Texas?
Well, actually, the press, give me just a second. I got to find the exact date for you.
February 24th, Mr. Chairman.
It was at least a week ago. I want to give you the actual date. February 21st was actually the first notice.
Thank you.
Yep. I thank the panel of the witnesses for being here. Incredibly valuable testimony. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for you, and they'll submit those in writing. You can submit your answers in writing. Pursuant to the committee rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days for such testimony. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.